Good evening. 7 o'clock. Would like to begin our webinar. Welcome to tonight's public webinar, our second webinar on the Shishalh BC Foundation Agreement Renewal, and thank you for taking the time to join us this evening. My name is Carolyn Camper, and I will be your moderator tonight. I am an Assistant Deputy Minister in the Ministry of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, and I am grateful to be joining you this evening from my office on the Lekwungen-speaking peoples territory known as Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. The purpose of this webinar is to provide a technical information session on key elements of the Shishalh BC Foundation Agreement Renewal and how it relates to the Shishalh Swia Dock Management Plan and Land Use Planning. It is also an important opportunity to respond to your questions. Following introductory remarks by the Honourable Randy Neal, Minister of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship and MLA for Powell River Sunshine Coast, the presentation will be led by Tom McCarthy, Deputy Minister for the Ministry of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, and Laurie Halls, Deputy Minister for the Ministry of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship. This is our second webinar. We held the first one on March 20. Some of you may have attended that session. The session tonight will be the same presentation that we provided on the first webinar. And similar to the last webinar, we will have time after the presentation to respond to your questions. This presentation is being recorded, and we will have this posted on a web page that houses information on provincial work with the Shishalh Nation over this week. Before we begin, would like to share a video message from Shishalh Nation. The province and Shishalh Nation are partners in the Foundation Agreement and would like to show this video.
I te kwail hatsamitsa chinsquish Shishalh chin alahane chin. Emash ukmesiaya. Good afternoon. My ancestral name is Hatsamitsa. My English name is Candace Campo. I'm a member of the Shishalh Nation of the Hanachin clan. The Shishalh people comprise of 4 clans, Hanachin, Sonai, Tuwonk, and Skekos. And our homelands are from Queen's Reach, all through Lochomane, Jervis Inlet, down into Narrows Inlet, Slechwem, Scupa, Salmon Inlet, off Tolage, Sechelt Inlet, throughout the Sunshine Coast to the border of Quissam Stelkaya, known as present-day Roberts Creek, and up the coastline into Copaleen, Pender Harbor, and further up across Lochomane, Jervis Inlet into Sultry Bay and Quaquanes. Our Shishalh homelands border with our dear neighbors, the Tla'amin people. And the Shishalh are one of many Coast Salish peoples, and our neighbors include Sanemo across the Salish Sea, the Nanaimo, the Cowichan, the Pentalach, throughout the lower mainland, Tawasin, Semiahmoo, Musqueam, Sko'omish, right to the east of us, to the north, the Lil'wat peoples, and further, the Harrison peoples, to the west, the Tla'amin, the Klahus, have been neighbors and allies and friends to our peoples for thousands of years.
Thank you. Now, here's an outline of the discussion. As a reminder, this is a live public session, and we have an hour and a half this evening for information sharing and to respond to questions. Tom will begin with some background on how the relationship between the province and Shishalh has grown over time. He will also provide an overview of the key elements of the foundation agreement renewal before handing it over to Lori, who will provide updates to the dock management plan and joint land use planning. Our main goal, though, this evening is to hear from you and to directly respond to your questions and concerns. So in a moment, I will share the process for submitting questions through the online platform, and we have also received a number of questions via email. Before turning it over to Minister Neil for opening remarks, wanting to highlight that this is one of many opportunities to provide input. We'll finish off today's meeting by highlighting some next steps and what those opportunities are. Now, I would like to hand it over to the Honourable Randy Neil for opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Carolyn, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight once again. I wish I was in the SWEA of the Shishalh tonight, but I am in Victoria in the legislature where we are currently debating the second reading of the Carbon Tax Amendment Act, Bill 8. We are going to hopefully vote to get rid of the consumer carbon tax tonight, but we are also expected to go all night. So I think I'm going to spend the night here. I know that I have house duty starting at midnight tonight, so we'll see how it goes. So that means I am in Victoria, the territory of the Lekwungen peoples, including the Sanghees and Esquimalt nations. I'm so happy to be here again, and I'm so thrilled that all of you have joined this second webinar and discussion. I hope you all had a good spring break. Like most of you joining tonight, the Sunshine Coast is our home. And we love our homes, we love where we live, and when we love something, we want to take care of it, and we want to understand the decisions that are made about where we live and how it shapes our community. And that's why sessions like these are so important, to ensure that we have the same information and understanding. And as your MLA for Powell River and Sunshine Coast and the Water, Land and Resource Stewardship Minister, I really want to make it clear that my commitment is openness and transparency. Why I decided to run for MLA in our gorgeous riding of Powell River Sunshine Coast is because I really thought that we needed to all come together at the same table and have the discussions that affect the future of our coast, especially because we all have the same goals. We all want to take care of it. We all want to restore the biodiversity and make sure that we have enough fish and crabs and trees so our great grandchildren can enjoy the area. So it's just coming together and learning how we can move forward together. So staff from my ministry, Lori Halls, the Deputy Minister, as well as Ministry of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, Tom McCarthy, are here to answer questions tonight. They are absolutely experts in their fields, and I don't want to embarrass them, but they have served under so many governments, probably since Gordon Campbell and all the successive governments since then. So they really are experts in their fields and how we got to this place. And their job is to explain it to you and then to listen to you and answer any of your questions. Open dialogue is essential. We are dedicated to making sure your voices are heard every step of the way. So I will turn it back to Carolyn now, but I will chat with you a little bit later to talk about what the first session was like and the types of questions we got before we head into the Q&A. But for now, back to you, Carolyn, and thank you all so much for joining.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister Neil. So moving to how to participate. To ask questions on the Zoom platform, please see the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to send questions throughout the presentation. We will hear from Tom and Lori first, and then move to a Q&A period. And here we have a little bit of next steps. Echoing Minister Neil's comments, we're here to listen. We want to hear from you. Your views are very important, and we want to ensure that you also have the information that you need. We will respond to as many questions as time permits, those that came in via email, those that come in via the online feature. I may ask Tom or Lori to respond to a topic or a theme if there are many questions that are similar. as I've noted, we have received a number of questions by email in advance of both webinars. And thank you to those that have taken time to write us directly. And know that you can still follow up and submit questions tonight or afterwards. We will respond again to as many as we can. At the same time, we will provide a written response to the questions that have been received from both webinars, whether via email or online, and post a written response document on the same webpage as this presentation will also be hosted. If there are, again, multiple inquiries on similar topics, they will be grouped together and organized by theme to provide a more comprehensive and streamlined response in that written document. But for tonight, we are going to answer as many questions as we can. At this point, though, we'll first pass it over to Tom and begin the presentation.
Thank you very much, Carolyn, and good evening, everyone. Just before we dive in here, I also wanted to recognize that today, March 31st, is National Indigenous Languages Day, which is an opportunity for Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in Canada to recognize and celebrate the very rich and diverse heritage of Indigenous languages. So I'm going to go through a little bit here on the foundation agreement renewal. I'm going to start a little bit by talking about the foundation agreement in 2018 and a little bit of context leading into that. Then I'll get into elements of the foundation agreement renewal and try to provide a little bit of detail on that before I hand it off to Lori. I think to understand the commitments outlined in the renewal, it is important that we understand and recognize where we were in the past and how the relationship between the province and Shishalh has evolved quite a bit over the years. The word Swiya, as you probably know, describes the lands and waters that the Shishalh people have lived on since time immemorial and can be translated as world, birthplace, lands, or territory. I think, you know, a little bit of history. You probably also know that I think historically, Shishalh and other First Nations were excluded from decisions made about lands and resources in their territories. In the Swiya, change came when the province and Shishalh started working together with new respect and understanding. That pathway came out of really hard, good faith efforts at building relationships, but it also came out of decades of court decisions at all levels, where the general sort of trend has been to find, with further and further specificity, and define Aboriginal rights and Aboriginal title. And there's two places in the province where the courts have found Aboriginal title to exist, at Silcotin Territory and Chatlat, just quite recently. And of course, we've negotiated an Aboriginal title arrangement in Haida Gwaii. The courts have also consistently urged us to negotiate rather than litigate. And in BC, successive governments have tried to negotiate as a means of solving problems in a manner that supports everyone living together and appropriately recognizes the First Nation rights and title. I also want to address here a question on why not a treaty for Shishalh. Treaties are one pathway to reconciliation, but they're not the only pathway. And we worked with Shishalh to develop their preferred pathway. We worked with nations all around the province on the approach that is going to work for them. Our new sort of partnership approach I talked about a minute ago was expressed in our 2016 government-to-government agreement and reconciliation agreement, which led directly to a forestry shared decision-making agreement, dock management plan, and the 2018 foundation agreement. And I think those agreements have created a number of economic, environmental, and social benefits for the broader community. as I think most of you are aware, in 2018, BC and Shishalh entered into a groundbreaking comprehensive reconciliation agreement called the Foundation Agreement. This agreement is really the pillar to our strong relationship, and it's core to advancing shared goals that we discussed on the previous slide. Comprehensive reconciliation agreements are sort of a term that we use that really are long-term phased agreements focused on government-to-government relationships that recognize inherent rights and title. And this phased approach to long-term reconciliation helps create transformative change in a way that's predictable, transparent, and allows for learning to occur as Shishalh and the province's relationship unfolds over time. The 2018 agreement, if you go look at it, sets out the broad vision that we're trying to achieve. And then it also sets out, specific things that we want to achieve to start taking steps towards that vision. And then the concept is that subsequent phases, which are intended to be every 5 years, build on each other to achieve that vision. So since the signing, the province and Shishalh have done a tremendous amount of work together to implement the many components of the agreement. There's a few kind of examples of that on this slide here, and including Crown land transfers to support economic development and housing, and expanding shared decision-making to include all forestry decisions and Land Act decisions. So that's a little bit on the kind of history, how we got here, and the 2018 Foundation Agreement. I want to now speak to our continued work together through the 2024 Foundation Agreement renewal. So as I said, the first 5-year term of the 2018 agreement concluded in October 2023, and through 2024, we've worked hard to negotiate terms of the next phase. We recently signed that agreement, which updates the existing Foundation Agreement and which outlines our joint commitments for the next 5-year phase. I want to say up front here that I know there have been questions that have been raised about why we announced the agreement after the election. There's no, we simply, to be blunt, we simply ran out of time to organize and set up the work, including the important and necessary engagement work in the lead up to the election. We just weren't ready. And putting forward information that isn't ready doesn't help anyone. So we announced it as soon as we could. After ministers were appointed, we could brief up, pull together an announcement and a celebration. At the same time, though, I acknowledge that we have to do better. I understand where people are coming from and where the concerns are coming from. And I think in retrospect, we should have found a way to get this out the door prior to the election. So I want to acknowledge that. And I want to commit to you that, as Minister Neal said at the outset, we want to improve transparency around these types of agreements to support public confidence in the work we're doing together with communities, First Nations and non-First Nations alike, because we're doing lots of good work together. So back to the agreement, it's a renewal of the existing agreement we signed in 2018. It supports the ongoing relationship between the province and Shishalh and develops strong partnerships that are founded on mutual interests and building a regional economy. And it provides a framework for subsequent negotiations on decision-making and on Shishalh Aboriginal title. And importantly, it integrates existing updates to the dock management plan that were announced in the summer of 2024, following a robust community engagement process. And I think one of the other aspects of the agreement is the commitment. You can see it throughout the agreement to engaging with the public on the work. The Foundation Agreement renewal outlines our commitments to engage with local governments and other partners as we move forward in the next 5 years. So you'll notice that a number of the elements that I'm going to go through here don't have tons of detail on them. We've set out the general intention of what we want to achieve, but we need to engage with everyone on what the specifics look like. And you'll see, I think, you'll see that sort of theme repeated a number of times here. So let me talk through some of the key elements. First one is Crown land transfers. So a key element of that agreement is to identify and transfer up to 6 square kilometers of provincial Crown land within the SWIA to Shishalh for cultural and economic use. The lands have not yet been identified. So over the next 18 months, BC and Shishalh will work together to identify attempt to identify and reach agreement on potential lands for transfer. And as we've done successfully in the past, we're going to continue to work closely with local government, interested parties, overlapping First Nations to find effective approaches that can address interests on the land base. We're also providing financial support to support the purchase of certain private lands of high cultural significance on a willing buyer, willing seller basis. We have not included private lands in our reconciliation agreements unless they are on a willing buyer, willing seller basis. And there are instances in this case where we are looking to purchase lands and we are in negotiations. I know there's been a few questions about some aspects of the agreement that have been redacted, and I think that those redactions are related to those lots that are in the middle of sensitive negotiations. And so a bit of insight there into the agreement redactions. Let's go to another key element now, consent-based decisions. So BC and Shishalh have decided not to proceed with a joint decision-making agreement for dock authorizations under the current mandate. We have agreed that any resumption of these discussions will involve obtaining a new mandate from Cabinet and conducting robust public engagement. And as I said, we do not intend to proceed with this approach at this time. In the 2024 renewal, we have committed to seeking approval for 2 new consent-based decision-making agreements. We haven't yet identified topics for these decision-making agreements. And I also want to flag that the language in the 2024 renewal is clear. It's also clear in the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, which sets out a framework for joint and consent-based decision-making agreements that we need to engage with the public on these agreements. And so we'll do that. We'll engage with interest holders, partners, local government, and the public when we negotiate these agreements. Maybe a quick word on what consent-based decision-making looks like. It really allows the province to work shoulder to shoulder with First Nations on decisions that impact their territories. Under a consent-based agreement, both the province and the First Nation must approve a project before it can proceed. Fairness, process transparency, clarity, and engagement are critical parts of any consent-based decision-making agreement. And I think if you go look at the ones that we successfully concluded and published to date, both of which are in Tahltan territory in the Northwest, with respect to mining, you're going to see those principles embedded deeply in the development and design of the agreement. And I'd say BC and Shishalh are committed to developing decision-making processes that are predictable and transparent. The next key element, exclusive decision-making, is a commitment to explore a future exclusive decision-making opportunity. Again, continuing the theme I reflected, we have not yet proposed topics for an exclusive decision-making agreement. The timing for this agreement would come after both consent-based decision-making agreements are in effect that I referred to on a previous slide. And so we'll seek to do this on an agreed-to topic within the next 4 to 5 years. A little bit on what exclusive decision-making is. It's an agreement that would recognize the jurisdiction of Shishalh to make decisions in relation to a specific topic, with the province stepping back from decision-making on that topic. This agreement will have a defined geographic area and agreed to principles that guide decision-making. And as I said, the important legal standards of accountability, transparency, and procedural fairness would also apply to this decision-making. It's too early at this point to determine the nature and scope of an exclusive decision-making agreement, but one example that we've reached in other kinds of agreements around exclusive decision-making is First Nations decision-making on wildlife harvesting for their members in their territory. And so again, I want to commit that we're going to engage with you on what that can look like when we get to that element. Now I want to speak to another element, which is recognition of Aboriginal title. The Foundation Agreement renewal includes a shared commitment to negotiate and attempt to reach an agreement that recognizes Shishal's Aboriginal title within Shishalh Swia. This marks the beginning of a multi-year process that will involve detailed negotiations, in-depth consultation, and approval from various decision-making bodies like Cabinet and the Shishalh Council. And we anticipate that any such agreement would be implemented through legislation in the legislature of British Columbia and through Shishalh law. At this time, we have not begun negotiations. Okay, so we have not begun those negotiations on this topic, and it is too early to determine the scope of a potential Shishalh Aboriginal title agreement. The approach to negotiating Aboriginal title taken by the province and nations is different in each context. There's no one-size-fits-all style Aboriginal title agreement. We recently, as I alluded to earlier, agreed with the Council of the Haida Nation on a title agreement. That was a unique circumstance. Haida Gwaii is a unique place. The Sunshine Coast, the Swia, is a very unique place. Was pleased to see that the Government of Canada has just taken the exact same approach as we took with respect to the Haida Nation title agreement. It mirrors ours in reflecting that there is no impact on private lands. The recognition of Aboriginal title by BC will respect and protect private lands. Private landowners will have the same rights, privileges, and obligations that they do now. The precise wording and approach that Shishalh and BC will take to reflect that will be determined when we formally start discussions on title, but I want to confirm that's a position shared by Shishalh and BC. And I also want to flag that the negotiation will require engagement with local government, interest holders, overlapping First Nations, and the public. What is Aboriginal title? Aboriginal title refers to the Aboriginal right to land. It's a unique property right held by an Indigenous collective. It includes the right to exclusively use and occupy the land, manage and make decisions about the land, and benefit economically from the land. The recognition of Aboriginal title has been informed by decisions by provincial and federal courts going back decades. I want to talk a little bit about some additional commitments. Through the renewal, the province has committed to ongoing funding to support Shishalh Nation's work in a number of initiatives. This includes funding to the nation to help advance economic development, culture, and revitalization. We're providing funding for collaborative environmental monitoring and enforcement, and financial support for environmental restoration projects in areas of critical marine habitats. We're providing funding for purchase and installation of water barrels and universal water meters for Shishalh homes and buildings on Shishalh lands, and funding to the nation to develop a water supply plan for Shishalh lands. The average annual amount here is roughly $18 million a year. And as you may know, when we fund First Nations for things like economic development, those funds are spent in the community, and we expect the same here. So how does this agreement help the region? The new investments in economic development, continued joint land use planning and stewardship, and improvements to water supply will have a positive impact across the region. One of the things we can clearly see is that in this province, when we address longstanding challenges in First Nation communities, the whole region benefits from it. And as we move forward, we're committed to having better communication with all communities and making sure there's a much clearer understanding in regions about what work we're doing, who we're partnering with, and how everybody's going to be included in those discussions. So now I want to pass the presentation over to Lori Halls, Deputy Minister of Water, Land, and Resource Stewardship, to provide an update on the dock management plan and land use planning process.
Thanks very much, Tom. Good evening, folks. The Foundation Agreement renewal formalizes the commitments we made in the dock management plan publicly announced in August of 2024. This means that everything that was announced in August has been incorporated into the Foundation Agreement renewal and allows us to continue our work together in a good way. If your dock and boathouse is in the water as of July 1st, 2024, it can remain in the water. Local residents and representatives from local government, including the Dock Management Plan Advisory Group, informed the changes to the Dock Management Plan publicly announced last August. These changes demonstrate our commitment to ensure foreshore values are managed in a balanced and sustained way. These changes would not have been possible if it weren't for the support and feedback and the timeless hours the Dock Management Plan Advisory Group put in. I want to thank all of the Dock Management Plan Advisory Group members for their invaluable input and the incredible work on providing feedback and considerations to support these changes. Through our engagement on the dock management plan, we heard that providing more clarity for existing dock and boathouse owners was important. And so in response to this, the province and Shishalh have prioritized this work. With this in mind, the changes to the dock management plan announced in August are intended to simplify the process for existing dock and boathouse owners and to provide owners with a time to make any necessary improvements to their legacy structures in a cost-effective manner. The foundation agreement renewal includes plans to conduct more studies in the foreshore, undertake shared monitoring, and fund restoration work conducted by Shishalh Nation. As part of the foundation agreement renewal, we've embedded a strong joint commitment to continue to engage with local governments, interest holders, and Sunshine Coast residents so that everyone is informed about the work between the province and Shishalh Nation throughout the implementation of these commitments. Among the updates announced in August is a 3-year transition plan, which will allow existing dock and boathouse owners in saltwater to keep their current as-built structures and register them through an online self-registration form. During the transition period, we will review all self-registered docks to transition them into a longer 20-year renewable authorization. All existing dock and boathouse owners in saltwater will need to comply over time with certain measures that are necessary to ensure the protection of important ecosystems. These measures include a 10-year timeline for existing dock and boathouse owners to make repairs to their structures to replace flotation with encapsulated styrofoam or alternative flotation, and light penetrating decking. Beginning, that 10-year period starts in September of 2024. We are also necessary to take measures where in 2 years, addressing any actively breaking apart styrofoam. A much more detailed fact sheet is available online on the Shishalh SWIA Dock Management Plan website, which details all of the changes that were announced in August. The requirement in the dock management plan for environmental or archaeological reports for existing docks and boathouses has been removed, except in specific scenarios, such as when it's required by the archaeology branch. However, new docks will be required to complete environmental and archaeological reports, and we're working with Shishalh to ensure that those can be as efficient and what I might call painless as possible. I would like to briefly go over the commitments for the dock management plan within the foundation agreement and provide you an update on the work of our teams that we've been doing since August. To support the self-registration, an online system was launched in September of 2024. And to date, of the approximately 1,000 existing docks in the marine environment, about 40%, or as of yesterday, 442 owners have self-registered their docks and boathouses. Thank you to those of you that have registered, and a reminder, if you haven't yet, the website is there on the slide deck, and it helps to ensure a very timely review of your transition to those long-term authorizations. One of the other initiatives that we've undertaken with Shishalh is an inventory of all of our existing docks and boathouses within the Shishalh SWIA, and we collaboratively conducted these in the field in the fall of 2024 with both members of Shishalh, the BC Public Service, and public volunteers. That inventory is now complete. We've confirmed 1,410 docks in the water across the SWIA, and that inventory report will be made available in the coming weeks on our website. Condition assessments were undertaken as part of that inventory to identify, for instance, the number of docks with safety hazards. with unencapsulated styrofoam, or those with or without light penetrating decking. We will be reaching out to the approximately 10% of dock owners with derelict docks over the coming months to lay out the steps for those improvements and what needs to happen to address them. The field work we carried out this past year will continue with additional collaborative annual monitoring of 60 days per year. In our first few months, we also offered the first batch of 20-year long-term renewable authorizations, 6 to be exact, in January of this year. Following the interregnum period that we were in the fall as a result of the election, we have reinitiated our engagement, and we continue to work with key stakeholders for feedback on the implementation plan, our processes, and outstanding questions and answers. In April, we will be hosting three 1-hour sessions to hear from all commercial dock owners on proposed amendments to the dock management plan. Those sessions will be hosted on April 17th, 23rd, and April 30th. And we will be reaching out to the commercial dock owners with more details and the invitations. These conversations will inform updates to the dock management plan for commercial considerations. I also want to give some more details on what these long-term renewable authorizations for docks and boathouses look like and how they work. The authorization contract will be through a license of occupation. This is a standard form of tenure under the Land Act and is something that we have thousands of examples of across the province. It is a contractual agreement with the province and provides the right to use or occupy the land for a specific purpose and for a defined period, subject to various conditions. In the past, private moorage rates were $400 for a 10-year term, and the government needs to update the rent value to 2025 values. This will be a future government decision that we will be bringing forward. Because the government has not decided on the approach or value of rent, the 6 licenses of occupation that were issued in January were done so without rent being charged for that first year. We know that protecting the foreshore ecosystems and cultural and archaeological sites is important for all British Columbians. Coastal foreshore archaeological and environmental studies work plans are already being developed for both archaeological and environmental studies and will be made available to the public once approved by Shishalh and BC. Annual progress updates will also be shared online. The results from the studies will help to better inform the dock management plan and others related to land use planning and decision-making processes. For our freshwater lake dock owners, in March of 2024, we announced we would be putting a pause on the application of the dock management plan in freshwater. During this time, further studies and engagement was to be undertaken to understand the impact of docks in the freshwater environment and to consider revisions to the plan. While this pause is ongoing and our work to conduct those studies and engagements occurs, it is our expectation that existing freshwater docks will follow a similar process to the existing marine docks to transition to a long-term authorization once updates to the dock management plan have been incorporated with freshwater considerations. And this will likely include that self-registration process. A freshwater lakes literature review is being developed in order to better understand the potential ecological impacts of docks and boathouses on those freshwater ecosystems. We've drafted the scope of a planned literature review and critical habitat mapping project focused on freshwater lakes. Engagement with members of key freshwater lake associations has been initiated to ensure that freshwater dock and boathouse owners' voices are heard in this process. This will likely include that self-registration, as has been the existing dock owners in the marine environment. And it will lead to that transition for freshwater dock and boathouse owners to a 20-year long-term renewable authorization. Updates will be posted to the Shishalh SWIA Dock Management Plan website, and questions can be directed to the email addresses that are provided. Engagement will continue with freshwater and marine stakeholders, including the commercial dock owners. Outreach to self-registered dock and boathouse owners on the transition to long-term 20-year authorizations will also continue. I also want to give an update on the joint BC Shishalh land use planning. Our collective work on land use planning with Shishalh began as a commitment in the 2018 Foundation Agreement. In the simplest of terms, land use plans help to identify what activities happen where on the land base. We've been working since that time through a very stepwise approach to strategic land use planning on the Sunshine Coast. Consistent with our provincial principles for planning, this work is being done in partnership with Shishalh Nation and with collaboration and engagement with local governments, stakeholders, industries, and communities. Our first connection point with stakeholders and the broader public started back in November of 2020. We connected through a series of workshops, focus groups, and a questionnaire to share information about the planning process and to hear from the public about interests and concerns related to the planning processes and the values we were looking at. A summary report about this phase of engagement is available on our website, and a link will be shared in a future slide. The engagement was helpful to put us on the right path to understand studies and pull information together to assess the condition of key values. The second phase of work was around assembling credible data and undertaking value conditions reporting based on provincial and Shishalh knowledge. We did this work for a large number of values, and as you can imagine, this could take some time. The bringing together of both our shared knowledge is part of the innovative approach we have taken with Shishalh that will lay the foundation for a shared vision for the stewardship of our land and resources in the SWIA. The shared vision will consider the interests of residents of the SWIA. A critical part of the land use planning process is stakeholder and public engagement. We are now preparing to share with you the reports, studies, and information that we've developed in this stage of our work. We want to gather your feedback and input to help us build that shared vision. We will be sharing information about biodiversity, which includes information about old growth forests, wildlife species like grizzly bears, black bears, elk, deer, the northern goshawk, and marbled murrelet. We'll be looking at information on watershed integrity, including forested watershed information and coastal foreshore information, and resources that are important to Shishalh culture, including rights and title and reconciliation. Lastly, we'll also be looking at sustainable economic development, including information about cumulative impacts, climate change, and socioeconomic baselines. There will be a wide variety of opportunities for the province and Shishalh to hear from local governments, stakeholders, and community organizations and the public. Online materials for each of the planning themes will be made public at the start of the engagement period, and a public questionnaire will be open throughout the 8 weeks of our engagement. There will also be 2 open houses, 3 stakeholder workshops, and 4 focus groups with community organizations. Dates and invitations have not yet been confirmed, but we anticipate starting our engagement with you in April. For information about the planning process, you can access our planning website via the link shared in the chat or by scanning the QR code here on your screen. Dates for the open houses and the links to the materials will be shared on the website at the start of the engagement period. Thank you very much. And with that, I'll turn it over to Carolyn.
Great. Thank you, Lori. Moving to the next slide. A couple slides before we move into questions and answers. First, just important to echo what you've heard from the presenters and Minister. The province and Shishalh are committed to engage with local government, interest holders, and the public as the foundation agreement renewal is implemented, and more information will be available as we begin this work. Ministry staff can deliver detailed and focused sessions on the renewal agreement to key partners, local government, First Nations, stakeholders, and we will also reach out to local governments on the preferred engagement approach moving forward. With this, it brings an end to our presentation, and we would like to invite you to continue to submit questions. We've got many already through the Zoom chat feature. As a moderator, I mentioned I will bring forward questions that we received in advance through email and through the chat feature tonight. Before inviting Tom and Laurie to respond to questions, though, I'd like to hand it back to Minister Neal to provide some more comments and address some questions that you might have heard from the public over the past few weeks.
Thanks, Carolyn. And yeah, thanks again, everyone. I just, before we get to the Q&A portion, I just want to thank everyone who attended our last session during spring break on March 20th. We had lots of good questions. We had a lot of similar questions, as Carolyn said, and as Laurie said. We're going to take all of the questions that we've had from both sessions tonight and the last one, and we're going to answer them all and put them on our website, as well as a recording from one of these two sessions as well. A lot of the questions we had last time, questions about Aboriginal title and private property rights, the timing of the announcement, Tom addressed that, a lack of engagement, decision-making agreements, and veto power. I really want to let folks know, I live in Pender Harbor. You guys know where to find me. I think most of you know where I live, the neighbors who live up there. If there's a question that doesn't make sense or that confuses you or upsets you, please reach out to me. This was why I ran in this election, was because I thought government needed to do a better job of being transparent and sharing. And as a former journalist and communicator, that is incredibly important to me. So I want to be able to answer any questions that you have at any time. And also, we picked up the keys for our office this morning in Shishalh. It's on Inlet Avenue, right across the street from the Pharmacy parking lot. So probably in a week or two, we're going to be able to move in. But if you are walking by there and you see the lights on, just go and knock. One of the constituency advisors will probably be in the office, either Lori Paul or Donna Bell. So go and say hi to them. I'll turn it back to Carolyn now and to answer the questions. But again, I want to remind everyone, if you have more questions after all of this is done, to please reach out to me anytime. Carolyn?
Thank you. All right, we're going to begin our questions that we've have received in advance, and through the online chat. And the first one is for you, Tom. You have mentioned and spoken about decision-making, and we've had a few questions on decision-making agreements under the Foundation Agreement Renewal. First, could you speak to the key differences between the shared decision-making process under the 2018 Foundation Agreement and the new consent decision-making process? And then after that, second, can you clarify what both consent-based and exclusive decision-making look like? I know you touched on those. If you could touch on those a little bit more. Yeah,
thank you, Carolyn. I appreciate the opportunity to provide a bit of clarity. So there is terminology here that is, I know, confusing. Shared decision-making is a general term that can describe a number of ways that First Nations and the province can work together to inform decision-making and ultimately to make those decisions. Currently, applications received by the province related to land and resource authorizations within the Shishalh SWIA under forestry legislation or the Land Act are reviewed through the Shishalh BC Shared Decision-Making Framework. Through that process, we built processes by which Shishalh and the province collaboratively review applications and strive to reach consensus. Recommendations are made to the decision maker, and through that process, that consensus building effort, but ultimately the statutory decision-making authority remains with the province. As was mentioned during the presentation, through the Foundation Agreement renewal, we have agreed to explore negotiations for 2 Section 7 consent-based decision-making agreements and 1 exclusive decision-making agreement. A consent-based decision-making agreement in this context would require Shishalh Nation and BC to agree to the proposed activity before a provincial decision authorizing the activity. An exclusive decision-making agreement would recognize the jurisdiction of Shishalh to make decisions in relation to specified matters, with the province stepping back from decision-making on those matters. In both cases, legal standards of accountability, transparency, and procedural fairness would apply to the decision-making. And these are legal standards that are required under the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. Any future decision-making agreement will be related to decisions that are currently under the mandate of the provincial government. So decisions under the mandate of local governments would not be affected. And of course, as I've stressed, under the negotiations, we'll be doing a lot of engagement with local government, interest holders, and the public. So I'll leave it there, Carolyn.
Okay. Next question for you, Laurie. Are the Land Act amendments coming back? If so, what amendments are being sought? People were under the impression the government was not going to pursue Land Act amendments.
Thanks, Carolyn. No, the province is not advancing Land Act amendments at this time. And I think this question stems from and is related to section 17.10 of the Foundation Agreement, which says, we acknowledge and agree that the resumption of any negotiations under Section 7 of the Declaration Act related to dock authorizations and the conclusion of any related agreement will include a robust public engagement with governments and potentially affected stakeholders and requires a subsequent mandate and legislative amendments to the Land Act. Through the Foundation Agreement, the province has agreed to explore negotiations for 2 Section 7 consent-based decision-making agreements and 1 exclusive decision-making agreement, as Tom talked about. Topics for these new consent-based decision-making agreements will not include docks. And in addition, the province will not be pursuing exclusive decision-making for docks as well.
Thank you, Laurie. Tom, back to you. Can you speak to why signing the Foundation Agreement renewal was not announced until the end of January 2025? You did touch on that. If you could please add some more background information.
Yeah, sure. Look, I know there have been questions raised about why we announced this renewal agreement after the election. And as I said in the presentation, just to repeat, we ran out of time to organize and set up the work required before an announcement could be made. We had to do the work of notifying dozens of interest holders, neighboring First Nations, local governments before the announcements, and holding meetings with them and individually coordinate how we plan the agreement so we could hit the ground running with the land use planning, engagement, surveying, and work across ministries to align implementation. There's a lot that goes into that, and we do really try to be ready prior to an announcement, and of course working with Shishalh on how the announcement would look and how we would celebrate this step forward together. Putting forward information that isn't ready doesn't help anyone. So as I said, we announced it as soon as we could, but look, I also want to acknowledge that we have to do better. That we should have found a way to prioritize this, to push this out the door prior to the election, and I want to acknowledge that and just commit to being transparent around these types of agreements to try to build confidence, public confidence in the work we're doing together with communities, with First Nations and non-First Nations alike. So we want to commit to that.
Okay, thank you, Tom. And question for Laurie. Has there been any special consideration to group moorage situations which are more efficient in the use of the foreshore and will take less administrative time from the ministry?
Thanks, Carolyn. And that's a great question. And yes, we do recognize that group moorage, strata moorage, and community docks that allow for many boats will be included under the commercial moorage, best management practices and considerations.
Great. Back to Tom. Question came in noting that the copy of the foundation agreement addendum regarding medium-term milestones dated August 16, 2024, which is posted on the BC government website, has the details of 2 blocks of land redacted. Can you tell the applicant, the person, public here, what are those lands and what is the expected expenditure of public money to acquire the land? If you cannot tell me, can you tell me why that information cannot be released to the public? Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, thank you. So certain sections of the foundation agreement renewal relate to commitments made by the province to support Shishalh in protecting certain privately owned land parcels. These lands hold significant cultural importance for Shishalh Nation. And so the information on the current property owner or owners is kept confidential, and the information about the lot, so we don't divulge the location of lands being discussed. There's a couple reasons why. One, because it's standard practice across government to not release information about private property owners during sales. But also, the information relating to land parcels has been kept confidential to safeguard these lands from potential disturbance or desecration as we work to complete on a willing buyer, willing seller basis purchases of these properties. We just don't have an estimate of the potential cost to protect those parcels yet. Once those parts of the agreement are concluded and we can have appropriate protections in place, the province reviews those sections and typically removes the redactions and uploads the agreement again on the, we have a MRR website which has copies of all of our agreements, and we will upload the unredacted version up and kind of replace the redacted version with the unredacted version. So that's back to you, Carolyn.
A couple of questions have come in around why we are not negotiating a treaty with Shishalh Nation. And wouldn't that be a better way to protect non-Indigenous interests?
And I assume that's for me again, Carolyn?
Sorry, I didn't direct. Yes,
No,
Tom.
okay, that's fine. So look, there's no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to reconciliation and negotiating with First Nations. As you know, many of you, the treaty process has been in place for a long time. It's taken longer than we thought. It achieves and has the potential to achieve really powerful outcomes. But I think the province has also realized in the last number of years that there are multiple pathways to achieve reconciliation outcomes. And we have started to work with First Nations, and Shishalh, I think, is one of the really strong examples of this, where we've taken a different approach and pathway to reconciliation. And this is the case here with the Comprehensive Reconciliation Agreement kind of trajectory, which here we call the Shishalh Foundation Agreement. I think in the treaty process, and there was a couple of good questions in the chat about, treaties are kind of maybe full and final answers. They give us predictability. I think what you will see in the treaty processes, including the ones that we're negotiating now, is that we really are thinking about treaties as well as what we call living agreements. Agreements that change over time to accommodate our existing circumstances. One good way to think about the government-to-government relationship that we are trying to find with First Nations across the province is to think about a relationship that's similar to how the provinces and the federal government interact. There's, understandings in the Constitution with respect to jurisdictions and authorities. There's tremendously complex fiscal arrangements between the parties. The parties are constantly talking, engaging, having difficult conversations, having disagreements, but lots of agreement and lots of collaboration. And through that process, it's called cooperative federalism. That's the kind of term for it. That's how we move forward together. Nations have been shut out of processes of cooperative federalism. And I think some of the work we're doing here is to build mechanisms for First Nations to participate in that work and in bringing First Nations, I think as the Constitution asks us to, back into the work that we're trying to do as we govern and make decisions on this in this great country. I'll leave it there, Carolyn.
Okay. Now we'll go back to Laurie. A question on zoning, culturally sensitive or otherwise. Will new zoning jeopardize or cancel 20-year renewable tenures?
Thanks, Carolyn. And I'm assuming the question is referring to the zoning that will take place as a result of the land use plans. And so the zones that are delineated in the Calpalan management area will not change as a result of the land use planning process. Information on the current conditions of the coastal foreshore across the SWIA has been gathered as part of the land use planning work currently underway. This information will help BC, Shishalh, and the public to understand where environmentally sensitive areas exist throughout the rest of the SWIA outside of Calpalan. This initial current condition assessment, along with the feedback we hear during the upcoming public engagement, will help to inform where new management areas or zones may be established outside of the Calpalan. Any new management areas will help us to ensure that we are appropriately mitigating impacts or protecting important sensitive areas. And this may mean restrictions on new development in the foreshore. However, BC and Shishalh remain committed to the announcement that we made in August. And that is for those docks and boathouses in water as of July 1st, 2024, they can remain in water and will be transitioned to 20-year renewable authorizations.
Okay. So we've heard a significant number of questions regarding what negotiation of Aboriginal title means, particularly for private property owners. Tom, you addressed this last time, but can you please speak to anticipated impacts to private property from any future Aboriginal title negotiations?
Yes, sorry, Carolyn. Do you mind just repeating the question here?
Absolutely. The questions actually have come in by email and online regarding negotiation of Aboriginal title, and particularly what does it mean for private property owners? And you did speak to this, but if you could speak particularly to anticipated impacts to private property from any future Aboriginal title negotiation.
Yeah, thank you. So negotiations have not begun on the Aboriginal title conversation. So again, what we did in the agreement was we set out a frame and I think our sort of shared objectives of what we're looking to achieve. And we need to flesh that out together, and that's going to involve engaging with you. The approach that we want to take to negotiating Aboriginal title is going to be different in every context. I went through that earlier, but I just want to make that point again. Okay. One of the principles that's really important to us is that we do not impact fee simple private property rights. The precise wording and the approach to that, we're going to have to determine, and we're going to come and talk to you about that. But I want to be really clear and direct about that intention. So I'll leave it there, Carolyn.
Okay. Well, we're going to stay with you, Tom. Because since the last webinar, we continue to see a lot of questions about whether there will be veto for Shishalh in the decision-making agreements being considered under the foundation agreement renewal. Can you please address this?
Yeah, look, I know that there is a lot of discussion about consent versus veto. Consent is the result of a process where we set out together, as we've done in 2 Section 7 agreements that we have with Taltan, processes by which we're going to achieve administrative fairness, transparency, and judicially kind of reviewable decisions and approaches, where we can clearly demonstrate that the approach that we're taking is the result of consideration that everyone understands, so that everybody understands how that decision process is undertaken. Okay, a veto is not that. A veto is not the result of a strong process. A veto is the result of sort of almost like gut reaction saying, no, I don't want this, or, you know, and that's not the work that we're engaged in here with First Nations. The province, in its role as a statutory decision maker, says yes or no to decisions all the time. It bases those answers, yes and no, on the basis of decision-making principles that are set out, that are transparent, and criteria that are expressed. And that's the same approach that we take when we design and build consent-based decision-making agreements.
Okay. Question for you now, Laurie. Since archaeological and environmental studies were already completed in Pender Harbour and are not publicly available, do individual owners have to take on the cost of another study when applying for dock renewal?
Thanks, Carolyn. So no, for those with existing docks in the water as of July 1st, 2024, they do not need to conduct an environmental or archaeological study as part of the dock management plan. That said, there is a potential that an existing structure could be over an existing archaeological site and may require further studies under the Heritage Conservation Act. During the long-term tenure authorization process for existing docks, owners with docks and/or boathouses overlapping known archaeological sites will be notified. The Heritage Conservation Act, as many of you know, protects archaeological sites on both public and private land, regardless of whether they have been previously recorded or disturbed and what site features are present. Constructions, renovations, and landscaping can damage or destroy an archaeological site. Property owners have a legal responsibility to ensure archaeological sites are not disturbed without appropriate permits in place. If an existing structure is found to be over an archaeological site, the dock is allowed to remain as built. However, any repairs to the structure, including structural or footprint changes, will require further studies. Dock owners on known archaeological sites must contact the archaeological branch before any ground disturbance for further information about what is required so that they can be in alignment with the Provincial Heritage Conservation Act.
Okay. We'll stay with you, Laurie. And a technical question for you. What does light penetrating decking mean? And can you also explain why light penetration under docks is important?
Thanks. So a two-part question, and I'll be as technical as I can. For the first part, what is light penetrating decking? Light penetrating decking is decking products that allow for a minimum of 43% light penetration through them. This could include grid or lattice type decking or any other product that allows penetration through the material. We do not give precise product details, as it would be unfair of the province to endorse one specific material or company for decking. In our updates announced in August, existing private moorage owners in the marine environment have 10 years to update their decking to light penetrating decking, and all new private moorages will need to be built with light penetrating decking from the get-go. As for the second part of the question regarding why light penetrating decking is so important, recent scientific studies and reports indicate that increasing the light transmissibility of overwater structures, such as docks, decreases the impact to the surrounding foreshore environment. Light penetrating decking is key to increasing the light transmissibility of docks. Mitigating the negative impacts of structures is important for helping us to protect and conserve the foreshore environment. Ensuring that docks are built in a way that allows more light to penetrate through the decking materials down to the ocean and floor below it. It's an important way that we are minimizing and mitigating the impacts to marine resource values, which has been a core objective of the dock management plan. And so while each dock configuration may require different upgrades to meet the light penetration requirement, the intention is for docks to allow light through their decking to mitigate the impacts of shading on marine values.
Okay, thank you. Tom, we've had some questions regarding funding provided to Shishalh under the foundation agreement renewal. And in the context of our current economic situation in the province, one specific question received is, with the current economic uncertainty in the province, how can we justify providing over $100 million over the next 4 years? Can you please speak to this a bit more?
Yes, thank you. The agreement is broken down by several different themes that I talked about a little bit earlier. So culture, stewardship, economic development, in terms of some of those funding streams. The foundation agreement renewal includes $47 million over 5 years for economic development. As you probably know, when we provide economic development funding to First Nations or to local communities, those funds, in large majority, and we know this to be the case, are spent locally. And that provides significant economic benefits for the region. Some of the habitat restoration work we're funding, for instance, places we're considering, whether it's McLean Bay or Anderson Creek or the Saginaw Estuary or the Oyster Bay mudflats, that's going to benefit everyone who uses those areas. As a whole, the agreement is $79 million over 5 years. I know some media reported it was worth 104. That included $25 million for housing, which is not included in this agreement. The intention is to use existing program funding for housing supports in the SWIA. So those are not new dollars in the context of this agreement and kind of not included in that calculation. So there's a bit more detail on that, Carolyn. I hope that's helpful.
Okay. We'll go back to Lori. Building on the next steps conversation, we've had a few questions come in asking for details about next steps for freshwater and what considerations would be taken into account when considering changes to the dock management plan, specifically for freshwater docks. For example, I saw many questions about how safety and access would be accounted for in case of emergencies such as wildfires.
Thanks. As mentioned in the presentation, we'll be doing a freshwater lakes literature review, which will be conducted by an independent registered professional biologist. A fair process will be followed to determine who would be hired to conduct the review. The budget for the literature review is $40,000. To address the questions about having boats at the ready in case of emergency, such as wildfire, we are continuing to engage with members of the key freshwater lake associations to ensure freshwater dock and boathouse owners' voices are heard and key considerations, such as emergency response, are raised to the surface. For example, last year, in response to what we heard in the public engagement, we did announce in March of 2024 that we would be updating the dock management plan and the best management practices for the marine area to provide more flexibility for site-specific consideration. This allows for site-specific reviews and considerations of unique scenarios that may exist for a private moorage, such as those in the freshwater.
Great. Back to Tom. We understand that there are questions regarding the commitment under the foundation agreement renewal to transfer Crown lands. One question that's come in is if there is an existing lease or tenure across Crown lands in this area, would a land transfer affect this? And if it did, how would the existing stakeholder who has this tenure be compensated?
Yeah, thanks. So the foundation agreement renewal includes opportunities for Shishalh Nation to acquire Crown land in the SWIA, as you know. There's two different kinds of commitments. The first one is for the province to identify 1 square kilometer of provincial Crown lands within the Shishalh SWIA to be transferred for cultural use purposes, and then another 5 square kilometers of Crown lands to be transferred for economic development purposes. We have not discussed what those parcels may be. As we start to do this work and identify lands for potential transfer, the province and Shishalh will engage with local governments and rights holders to ensure that existing interests, such as leases or tenures on those lands, are addressed. There's a number of approaches that we can take to address those interests that could include, and this is all going to be the subject of discussion, and this is work that we do all the time in all of the kind of land transfer, land return conversations that we have with First Nations around the province. We look at encumbrances on those lands, and there's a kind of a variety of approaches that you can take. You can continue working with the nation. You can choose to continue with existing provincial encumbrances on those lands. You can have the nation providing replacement legal instruments in certain cases. You can choose to move those tenures or replace them. That's all undertaken through an engagement process that is lengthy, but it is what we do. It's part of sort of the core business of government with respect to land transfers and land returns. And we're working through that every day in many different parts of the province.
Thanks, Tom. Lori, questions have come in asking for clarification on rental amounts for the licenses of occupation. Can you provide some more detail on what people can expect?
Thanks. One of the elements of a license of occupation and the rights that it confers, the contractual relationship that we enter into when we have a license of occupation, is the need to charge a rent. As mentioned in the presentation, the government needs to update the rent value to 2025 values, and this has not yet been done. We're preparing a decision to go forward to government on that front. But that actual value of what the rent will be charged has not been determined yet. For context, though, in the past, private mortgage rates were $400 for a 10-year term, and pricing would likely align with the province's pricing policy values of administrative efficiency, transparency, and fair administration. We would expect that this to be, again, a little higher, to keep it in line with 2025 values, but we'll be sharing more information about the outcome of government's decision on that with folks once we know the actual value of the rent that will be charged.
Okay. Lori, we're going to stay with you and follow up with questions that people have raised about the length of time it's taking for their submission to move from self-registration to long-term tenure. When can they expect to receive this?
Thanks, Carolyn. I do want to acknowledge that first and foremost, the change from a general permission to license of occupation has required us to provide both the meaningful rights and certainty to dock owners, but it has also taken us some time to plan and prepare for that transition. Additionally, our lands authorization teams within the ministry deal with thousands, I would say, of land applications a year, spanning everything from housing to mining to infrastructure and docks. Your dock licenses are a priority for us, but they must be measured against some of those other priorities. With the additional rights that come with a license of occupation also comes the requirement for the province to again collect that fair rent for the use of the land. We need to seek that decision from government and ensure that that's in place. We anticipate being able to issue a significant number of licenses over the next few months, starting with previously authorized docks, and then we'll be proceeding with the others that have self-registered on our self-registration system. Currently, that self-registration system is only available for private mortgages in the marine environment that were there as of July 1st, 2024. And just a reminder, if you haven't registered, the self-registration provides a general permission immediately upon completion of the self-registration. This means you've registered your dock, a temporary authorization form will be established that will grant a general permission, and that over time, and again, we're hoping to get several hundreds done over the next several months, you'll be transitioned to those long-term 20-year renewable authorizations. If you had a general permission and you did not keep a record of it, please contact our team at ssdmp@gov.bc.ca and they can send you a copy of your document.
Okay, thank you. And we were going to head back to you, Tom. We've had some specific questions on how we plan to work with the local governments in the SWIA moving forward, and in particular, how we will address their interests.
Thank you. So this is an important relationship with us. For us, this relationship with local governments, and I know that it's also important for Shishalh, and local governments are a very, very important interest holder in the SWIA. The foundation agreement renewal in a number of places specifically requires engagement with local government on key initiatives. And as we have in the past, we will continue to work with local governments moving forward. I know that Shishalh partners with local governments on any number of things on sort of an ongoing daily basis, as does the province in any number of different ongoing matters and activities. And I anticipate that we would continue to do so as we move forward with implementation of the foundation agreement renewal.
All right. And staying with you, Tom, there are questions about how to get the names on an email list for information and updates regarding the foundation agreement and the dock management plan.
Yeah, thank you. For updates on the foundation agreement and the dock management plan, a couple things. We're going to put all information updates on the province's work with Shishalh, including upcoming engagement opportunities on our website. So gov.bc.ca/Shishalh Foundation Agreement, all one word. We are working on providing answers to submitted questions for both webinars, both on the 20th and today, and questions that have been received by email over the past few weeks. We also want to give a bit of time to those of you who may leave this call with questions if you have any following. We've received a lot of questions, and we will be posting answers to those questions as soon as possible. And we're going to try to kind of organize those along themes, because there are themes that are emerging with respect to a number of the questions. So we're going to post those as soon as we can. Watch for messaging on the website, and we'll let you know when the Q's and A's are ready. As it relates to dock management plan, those can be found at gov.bc.ca/SWIA dock management. And we'd welcome your feedback and questions there. And you're always welcome to share additional questions or comments about the foundation agreement to that's IRR, Coast Negotiations. So Coast Negotiations, IRR Coast Negotiations, all one word, at gov.bc.ca. And slightly easier email for questions on the dock management plan to ssdmp@gov.bc.ca, which I think Lori just mentioned. So just repeating it there for your benefit.
Okay. Well, with our 5 minutes left, Tom, as a final question, people are wondering how this agreement is going to benefit the broader Sunshine Coast community. You touched on this in your presentation. Could you provide more information?
Yeah. So one of the things that, excuse me, I think we see in this province is that when we address longstanding challenges, including the challenges that exist in First Nation communities, the whole region benefits from it. When we deliver agreements, they create new jobs, they create economic activity. And that's what the foundation agreement writ large is about. And it's also what this renewal is about. It's about creating opportunities. There's commitments and initiatives in there that will benefit everyone who lives on the Sunshine Coast. There's new investments in economic development, continued joint land use planning and stewardship, and improvements to water infrastructure supply, just some of the foundation agreement renewal components that will have a positive impact across the region. Shishalh has invested heavily in the forestry and the aggregate sectors, and are real leaders in the work. The nation has a history of relationships and partnerships with forestry proponents and with aggregate companies in the SWIA, which create broader economic benefits. Another example, Shishal's water supply plan. That's going to help increase water quantity and help address water scarcity across the region. So another kind of element where I think partnership is helpful and beneficial. And of course, through the Lower Crown Reservoir proposal, the nation is helping to improve access to water for residents throughout the region that are serviced by the Chapman water system. So, I think those are concrete examples where Shishalh, as a leader in the region and in the province, in terms of the work that it's doing, is helping to build a stronger SWIA for everyone that lives in it. And as the province, we're committed to being part of that work. We also know that we need to do that work with everyone. And so we're also committed to the important and the necessary engagement that comes along with that. I'll leave it there, Carolyn.
Okay, thank you. I'll pass it over to Minister Neal for some concluding remarks, and we'll leave you with a slide with some additional resources. Minister Neal.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. And thank you once again, everyone, for joining. I know I do say this all the time, and I'm sure all of you say it too. Not only do we live in the best riding in the province, Powell River Sunshine Coast, it's the best riding in the country and probably the world. We are so lucky and fortunate to live where we live. And when we love something, we want to take care of it. And that is what we are all doing. And ultimately, I know we have the same shared goals. It's the way we get talking and communicating about those goals that we need to do a better job at, and I'm committed to do a better job of that. When we all sit at the same table and really have those tough conversations about how we want to take care of our community, we always come to better outcomes. So I feel incredibly lucky to live where we live. I feel incredibly lucky to be the voice in Victoria for each one of you. And I take that incredibly seriously. So again, I just want to say thank you so much. If there are any questions that you have, please reach out to me. As Tom and Lori and Carolyn said, it'll probably take a couple of weeks to get answers to all the questions that we've had over the past 2 seminars, but we're going to post them on the website, as well as one of the recordings on the website as well, so you can take a look at it. And I that's about it. I just want to say I'm so grateful for your time tonight. We're still on the second reading to get rid of the carbon tax, so it's going to be a long night for me, but have a great night, everyone. We'll see you next time. And this is the first of a lot of consultation sessions, so I really do appreciate your time.
Thank you, Minister. And just leaving you with a slide with some of the email addresses that Lori and Tom spoke to, a website where the information will be posted and where you can get more information. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight and for your questions and your input and feedback. Have a good night.